Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome. Today we're going beyond those typical Latin America stereotypes
Right.
and unpacking the really diverse heritage of Colombia.
It should be fun.
It really should be. And it's got some fascinating insights
Yeah.
that really highlight all the layers that make Colombia so unique. What do you think?
I mean, it's so easy to just fall back on stereotypes,
Yeah. Yeah.
But Colombia's story,
Yeah.
it's so much more complex and honestly way more interesting than
Yeah.
people might think.
For sure. So, first things first, we have to talk about Colombia's geography
Right.
because, well, it's pretty wild.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you've got the Andes Mountains,
Right.
like towering over everything.
Huge.
Right, but then, bam, you hit the Caribbean coastline.
Total.
I mean, that kind of variety has to shape everything, right?
Oh, absolutely. It shapes culture, ethnicity, you name it, the whole package. And it goes even deeper. You know Colombia for its amazing coffee, right?
Of course.
But did you know it's also the second most biodiverse country in the entire world?
Wait, seriously?
Yeah.
Second in the whole world.
A whole world.
So it's not just about the coffee beans.
Yeah.
Everything's diverse.
Exactly. That's incredible. Okay, so let's get into the people.
Okay.
I mean, we often hear about Latin America being this big melting pot, right? With
Yeah.
Indigenous, European, African ancestry all mixed in.
Yeah.
How does that specifically play out in Colombia, though?
Well, you are right. Colombia is largely mestizo. Officially, it's around 85%.
Okay.
But, those official figures, they
No.
never tell the whole story.
Right.
It's like trying to describe, I don't know, a symphony
Right.
as just sound,
Yeah.
To really appreciate Colombia's heritage,
Mm.
we need to break it down, starting with those indigenous roots. Okay, so let's rewind way back. Before the Spanish even showed up.
Right.
So we're talking what? Before 1499.
Yep.
What was going on in Colombia, like before that European influence?
Well, for centuries before the Spanish arrived,
Okay.
you had all these diverse indigenous groups thriving,
Mhm.
particularly the Chibcha people.
The Chibcha.
Yeah. And, this is where we have to bust a common misconception.
What's that?
It wasn't just the Incas, the Mayas, and the Aztecs who had those advanced societies.
Okay, yeah.
The Chibcha, they were incredible too. I mean, they developed sophisticated agriculture, including terraced farming with irrigation.
Wow.
And their settlements were interconnected in really complex ways.
So we're talking like truly complex societies in the mountains, right?
Exactly.
Not just those, stereotypical rainforest tribes.
Not at all. And one great example is the Huisca Confederation. They were part of the Chibcha, and they were incredibly densely populated.
Oh.
And not only did they have those impressive agricultural techniques, they also had some seriously fascinating customs. Like, for example, they viewed virginity in women negatively.
Wait, hold on. Virginity was seen as a bad thing?
It was.
Wow. That really goes against what the Europeans brought with them.
Oh, definitely. And there's more. They enjoyed this drink called chicha.
Oh.
It's fermented maize.
Oh, interesting.
And they also use tobacco.
Oh.
Oh, and they love to adorn themselves with gold and precious stones.
Which brings us to El Dorado, right?
Exactly. That mythical city of gold.
Yeah. Wasn't there some sort of ritual involved?
There was. The Huisca cacique, their leader, would cover himself in gold dust
Okay.
and make these offerings in Lake Guadavita.
Wow.
And the Spanish conquistadors, well, they witnessed this ritual,
Mm-hmm.
and it totally fueled their obsession with finding El Dorado.
So El Dorado, it wasn't a real city. It was
Mhm.
more like a misunderstanding.
Pretty much.
Mm.
They saw this ritual and just totally misinterpreted it.
Wow. And that misunderstanding shaped history.
Yeah. The Spanish quest for El Dorado, it led to the founding of many Colombian cities.
Really?
And it ultimately led to the beginning of mestizaje.
Which is the mixing of European and indigenous populations.
Exactly.
So that legacy, it continues today, right?
It does. It's estimated that something like 10 million Colombians
Wow.
have Chibcha ancestry.
That's a lot.
And many of them, particularly in the Andes, still keep those traditions alive today.
That's amazing. Okay, so we've got these deep indigenous roots,
Yeah.
but then obviously the Spanish arrive.
Right.
How did that influx of Europeans shape Colombia's heritage?
Well, unlike the southern cone of South America,
Mm-hmm.
Colombia's European immigration wasn't as massive or as diverse.
Interesting.
It was mainly Spaniards, and most of them arrived before Colombia's independence.
Okay, so we're talking like strong Spanish roots.
Definitely.
And I'm guessing a lot of influence from the south of Spain?
That's right. Think lots of tapas
Oh, yeah.
and flamenco in Colombia's DNA.
Love it. But the video also mentioned Another European group, right?
Yes, the Basques. They actually had a pretty significant presence in Colombia.
Really?
Yeah. There are over 3,500 Basque surnames in Colombia,
Wow.
and an estimated 2.8 million Colombians with Basque ancestors,
That's why. Where are they mostly concentrated?
mostly in the Antioquia region, about 40% of the population there.
Wow.
And they were more than just immigrants. The Basques, they were known for their success in business, and they often held really high social standing, which obviously shaped Colombian society.
Interesting. So there's this gender imbalance among these early Spanish arrivals, right?
There is.
Only like 10% were women.
That's right. About 10% of the Spanish who came to Colombia were women.
Wow. Okay, so if 90% of the Spanish immigrants were men, what does that mean for the genetic makeup of Colombia?
It means a lot of mixing between Spanish men and indigenous women.
Right.
And there was a study published in the American Journal of Human Genetics
Okay.
that looked at the Antioquia region and found that 90% of the paternal lineage is from Spain,
Okay.
but 90% of the maternal lineage is from indigenous women.
Wow. 90% paternal lineage from Spain, but 90% maternal lineage from indigenous women.
Yeah,
That's like DNA detective work.
it is.
What an incredible picture of how those populations intertwined.
Right.
Okay, so we've got this blend of indigenous and Spanish heritage.
Yeah.
But did Colombia experience those big later immigration waves like other parts of the Americas did?
You know, they mostly missed out on those massive European migrations of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. But there was a wave of Italian immigration in the 1920s.
Ah, so that explains some of those Italian surnames you see.
Exactly.
That's cool. Speaking of cool, the video also talked about Arabian influence in Colombia.
Right. Not something you hear every day.
No, not at all. This is where things get really interesting.
Yeah, it definitely challenges the typical image people have of Colombia.
Sure.
But starting around 1880, there was this influx of Christian Syrians, Lebanese, and Palestinians, mostly young men, who immigrated to Colombia,
Hold on. Arabian influence in Colombia, where did they settle?
primarily on the Caribbean coast, in towns like Lorica, Surete, and Monteria.
Interesting. So the Caribbean coast of Colombia has its own distinct blend of cultures.
It does.
And this Arabian influence adds another fascinating layer.
Totally.
Okay, so we've got indigenous roots, Spanish and Basque influence, a touch of Italy, and now Arabian immigrants on the Caribbean coast.
It's a lot, right?
Colombia's heritage is already way more diverse than I imagine.
Yeah.
And we haven't even talked about African roots yet.
You're right. And unfortunately, that part of the story starts with a much darker chapter. The arrival of enslaved Africans, coinciding with the arrival of the Europeans.
Yeah, it's tough to think about that part of history. It seems like every corner of the world has been touched by the horrors of slavery.
Yeah, it's a painful legacy for sure. And in Colombia, it's especially stark when you think about, well, the economics of the time.
What do you mean?
Well, back in the early 18th century, a young enslaved African was actually more expensive than a house.
Wow.
It really shows the cruelty of the slave trade.
Yeah. That fact is just chilling. It's hard to wrap your head around it. How many enslaved Africans were actually brought to Colombia?
Historians estimate at least 250,000 were brought to what was then New Granada, which included present-day Colombia. They were forced into labor in agriculture, mining, domestic service. It was brutal.
Awful. And then we have Cartagena de Indias, which played a major role in this, right?
Absolutely. Cartagena was a major slave trading center. I mean, for the whole Spanish Americas. They distributed enslaved people throughout the empire from there.
Wow.
It's a beautiful city today, but its history is, well, tied to this dark chapter.
Right. But even in all this tragedy, there were stories of resistance. Like the founding of San Basilio de Palenque, right?
Yes. Palenque is such an inspiring story. It was the first free town in the Americas, founded by escaped slaves
Incredible.
between 1570 and 1580.
A free town in the Americas in the 16th century? That's amazing.
Right. A real testament to the human spirit.
Absolutely. It makes you wonder about all the stories that were lost, you know? The acts of courage we'll never know about. What about their language? I heard they have a unique Creole language.
They do. It's called Palencaro Creole. It's a blend of Spanish with Central African languages,
So cool.
a way of preserving their identity.
Powerful. So how much of Colombia's population today is of African descent?
Estimates vary, but somewhere between 10.2 and 25%. It's a big part of Colombia's heritage. And their influences felt throughout the country, especially on the coasts.
Which brings us back to geography. It's clearly played a huge role in shaping where different groups settled in Colombia.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through that? How the landscape acted as a sort of destiny for these different cultural groups?
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's like the geography itself guided where people settled and how cultures mixed. You see, Afro-descendants are mostly on both the Atlantic and Pacific coasts. The Andes Mountains acted as a natural barrier between them.
So the mountains separated the coasts, and each coast developed its own unique blend of African, indigenous, and European influences.
Exactly. And then you have the eastern part of the country, which is mostly jungle.
Right.
That's where indigenous areas are more extensive. It's a region that's remained relatively isolated, so you see a stronger continuation of indigenous traditions there.
Makes sense. So we've got the east being more indigenous, the coasts more Afro-descendant. What about central Colombia? Those big cities like Bogota and Medellin.
Right, central Colombia, with its urban centers, acts as a magnet for people from all those diverse regions. It's like a melting pot within a melting pot.
A melting pot within a melting pot. I like that. And that's another contrast to other Latin American countries where the big cities are usually on the coast. Colombia's geography created a different dynamic.
Absolutely. And it all brings us back to one of the things that makes Colombia so fascinating. You have this incredible regional diversity, yet there's also this sense of shared Colombian identity that ties it all together.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've talked about the Caribbean coast with its Arabian influences, the Pacific coast with its strong African heritage, the Andean region with its indigenous roots in these big cities. It's almost like Colombia is a country made up of mini countries.
It is. Each region has its own distinct flavor. But despite those differences, there is something that unites Colombians. It's like this puzzle where all these pieces fit together to create this beautiful whole.
I love that analogy. Okay, so let's dive a little deeper into those mini countries. We talked about the Arabian influences on the Caribbean coast,
Right.
but what else makes that region stand out?
Well, you've got this amazing mix of African, indigenous, Spanish, and Arabian cultures. And then you add in that Caribbean vibe. It's truly special.
So we're talking music, food, architecture, everything. Give us some specifics. What's that Caribbean flavor?
Think champeta music. It's this fusion of African and Caribbean rhythms. So vibrant. And the food. Oh, the food. Incredible seafood dishes with Middle Eastern spices.
Wow.
And the architecture. A blend of colonial Spanish and Moorish influences. It's a feast for the senses.
It sounds amazing, like where cultures collided and created something totally new. It makes me want to book a flight right now. What about the Pacific coast? That's often described as even more remote. What makes it unique?
The Pacific coast is incredibly biodiverse. Lush rainforests, pristine beaches. It's truly a nature lover's paradise. But it's also where African traditions have been preserved in such a remarkable way.
I've heard about the music and dance from the Pacific coast. What are some highlights?
We've got the curlew. It's traditional music and dance, strong African roots. You'll hear powerful drumming, see energetic movements. It's impossible not to get swept up in it.
Sounds awesome.
And then there's the marimba music, played on these beautiful wooden xylophones. It's said to have originated in Africa and evolved on the Pacific coast.
Fascinating. What about the food? As vibrant as the music, I bet.
Oh yeah, seafood is a staple, of course, but then you have dishes like sancocho, which is this hearty stew, and delicious plantain-based dishes, reflecting those African and indigenous culinary influences.
Amazing how each region has its own culinary fingerprint. Okay, from the coasts, let's head inland to the Andes. That's where those Chibcha roots are strong, right?
They are. The Andes are the backbone of Colombia, and home to some of its most iconic cities, Bogota, Medellin, Cali.
So big cities, mountains, and a strong indigenous heritage. What's the cultural landscape like there?
It's this blend of traditional and modern. You'll find these bustling urban centers pushing the boundaries of technology, but then you also have these rural communities where they still practice ancient customs.
Wow. So it's like this constant push and pull between old and new.
Exactly, and that's part of what makes it so vibrant, a place that honors its past while looking toward the future.
And speaking of honoring the past, I've heard the Andes are known for beautiful textiles and crafts.
Oh yeah, weaving's a tradition that goes back centuries there. Intricate designs, vibrant colors, blankets, ponchos, bags, wall hangings. It's incredible artistry.
Beautiful. And of course, we can't forget about Colombian coffee,
Right?
grown mostly in the Andes, right?
Absolutely.
Wow.
The Andes provide the perfect climate. Colombian coffee is world-renowned for its flavor.
For sure. It's more than a drink. It's a way of life. But the Andean region isn't just big cities and coffee plantations.
Mm.
There's that vast rural landscape, too.
Right, where people live in close connection with nature.
Like in the Paramos. I've heard about those unique high-altitude ecosystems. What makes them so special?
The Paramos are incredible. They're so important for biodiversity, home to all kinds of plants and animals you won't find anywhere else. And they're crucial for water regulation, too.
Wow.
They're like giant sponges, absorbing rainfall and then slowly releasing it, providing water for millions of people.
So they're vital to the region.
They are. And there's a spiritual significance to the Paramos, too. Many indigenous communities see them as sacred.
It's amazing how interconnected everything is. The geography, the culture, the spirituality. It's a reminder that we're all part of this web of life. Okay, we can't talk about Colombia without mentioning the Amazon rainforest. Covers a huge part of the southeast, right?
Huge. The Colombian Amazon is amazing. A treasure trove of biodiversity, home to countless species. It's like stepping into a lost world.
But it's also facing serious challenges, right? Deforestation, climate change.
Sadly, yes. Protecting the Amazon is crucial, not just for Colombia, but for the whole planet. It plays such a vital role in regulating our climate.
Absolutely. And we can't forget the indigenous communities who've called the Amazon home for centuries.
Right. They hold so much knowledge about the rainforest. It's invaluable for conservation efforts.
We've explored the Caribbean coast, the Pacific coast, the Andes, the Amazon. It's clear that Colombia is this land of incredible diversity and contrast.
For sure.
But within all that diversity, there's something that binds Colombians together.
There is.
Yeah.
And that's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive. What are those unique Colombian traits? The ones that go beyond regional differences and help define a national identity.
Okay, so we've explored this incredible tapestry of regions and influences in Colombia. But now for the big question.
The big one.
What makes Colombia unique, even within the context of, Latin America as a whole?
That's the challenge, right?
It is. It's like we're trying to define the soul of a country.
It is a bit like that.
Yeah.
Especially in a place as diverse as Colombia.
Exactly. So where do we even begin?
Well, for me, I think it goes back to that incredible geographic diversity.
Okay, yeah.
Remember how the landscape, those Andes Mountains, the coastlines,
Yeah.
shaped those unique cultural pockets?
Right, it's like the differences are carved into the land itself.
Exactly. And because of that, those regional cultures, they had more time to, well, develop their own personalities.
So it's not just that Colombians are proud of their region, it's like a deeper thing, entwined with their history.
Right. And that leads us to another fascinating piece of Colombian identity.
Okay.
The way tradition and modernity coexist.
Interesting.
You have these ancient indigenous traditions still being practiced in rural communities.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you have these bustling cities embracing all the latest technology.
Yeah, it's a real mix, like old and new at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A blend of ancestral wisdom, but with a forward-looking spirit, too.
That tension is definitely part of what makes Colombia so vibrant.
It is a country that honors its past,
Mm-hmm.
but is also looking to the future.
Something that struck me in my research was the resilience of the people.
Oh, absolutely.
They've faced conflict, inequality, natural disasters,
True.
yet they always seem to come back stronger.
Resilience is definitely embedded in the Colombian spirit,
Yeah.
and I think it's linked to their strong sense of community and family.
Well, right. That collective spirit. How important is family in Colombian culture?
It's everything.
Oh.
Those ties are strong. They emphasize supporting each other, celebrating together, that warmth, that hospitality.
It's real, isn't it? That welcoming spirit.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
They make you feel like family, even if you just met.
Like that mi casa es su casa mentality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond blood relatives, too. There's
Yeah.
just a warmth and openness to everyone.
Yeah. It's like they're just naturally inclined to strike up a conversation, share a meal, offer to help.
It's a real generosity of spirit.
Okay, so we've got the geographic diversity, that mix of old and new, the resilience, and the strong sense of community.
Right.
What else shapes that Colombian spirit?
Well, we can't talk about Colombia without talking about music and dance.
Oh, of course. It's everywhere.
It is. From salsa and cumbia on the coast
Yeah.
to the curulao and marimba music of the Pacific,
Mm-hmm.
even the traditional bambuco and pasillo of the Andes.
It's the soundtrack of the country.
It is. And Colombians are known for being amazing dancers, too.
Oh, yeah.
It's more than just a hobby. It's in their DNA.
It's a way of life, right?
Absolutely. It's how they express joy, share traditions, connect with each other.
It's a universal language.
It is. And speaking of celebrating, Colombians love a good festival.
Oh, don't they?
all year round. They've got festivals and events that bring people together, celebrating their heritage, their faith, their love of life.
Yeah, it's like there's always something to celebrate in Colombia. That energy is contagious.
Totally. It's another thing that sets Colombia apart.
For sure. So we've got the music, the dance, the festivals.
Yep.
It's a country that embraces joy, resilience, the power of music to bring people together.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
It's been an incredible journey unpacking Colombia's diverse heritage. We learned about indigenous roots, European influences, the African legacy, even those Arabian connections.
And we explored those vibrant regions, each with its own personality and flavor.
Exactly. And we uncovered those intangible qualities, that resilience, the warmth, that love of music and celebration that make Colombia so unique.
It's been a great deep dive.
It has, and it reminds us that even within a single country, there's a whole world of stories to uncover, perspectives to consider. So as we wrap up, we leave you with this final thought.
Okay.
How does a nation as diverse as Colombia, with such strong regional identities, actually forge a sense of shared national unity? It's a question that's still shaping the country, and one we encourage you to think about. So keep diving deep and keep those minds curious.